Alrighty, folks. So the topic of the conversation today is another 1-power prismatic. This one is from SwampFox. It's called the SwampFox Raider. And if you look at it carefully, I mean, it'll become rapidly apparent that it looks very similar to all the other compact 1-power prismatics that are out there. I have 4 of them on hand, and I'm slowly going through them one by one. I've talked about the Gideon optics advocate. This is a SwampFox Raider, and I have the SLX and GLX 1-power prismatics from Primary Arms. If you're looking for vociferous condemnations and proclamations that one is infinitely better than others, I don't think you're going to get that from me, because honestly, one of the biggest takeaways from this whole series of evaluations that I'm doing with this is that the field has gotten very, well, quite mature and increasingly capable for not a lot of money, right? The most expensive one of these that I'm looking at is about 300, and this one is in the low to mid twos. And for that, it is remarkably impressive. So why am I so preoccupied with this 1-power prismatics? Well, preoccupied is probably not a good word, but they serve an interesting niche. They are a competitor to red dots or holographics to a significant degree. They are slightly bigger than compact red dots, but in the same general size and weight range as full-size red dots. These are usually 7 to 9 ounces in weight or thereabouts. They use the same mounts. The Raider is compatible with a micro aimpoint micro mounts. The eye relief is not as forgiving as a red dot, but this is one of the interesting things with all this latest generation of compact unity power prismatics. The eye relief, the eye box have gotten remarkably forgiving. Like with all this movement of my head, I have not lost the sight picture, the aiming point. I lose maybe some of the field of view on the edges, but the reticle is still very much in my field of view, and it is sharp. The big advantage of this is that there is this is a focusing optic, right? The big advantage of this is that there is a black edged reticle and there is illumination. The illumination is quite bright. You can easily see it even on a fairly bright New Mexico day. But the most important thing is that if your battery dies, you still have an edged reticle, and if you have astigmatism, this thing has an adjustable eyepiece, so you can adjust this to your eye, right? That is the big advantage. That's why these have been really doing well. If you are young and fit and you are trying to go at warp speed 9 at all times, you can probably go faster with a similar size red dot or holographic. Not by much, but probably can. I'm no longer young. I'm still at my fastest if I time it with the holographic. But as I get older, I learn to appreciate this, and if I have to stretch the distance just a little bit, the sharp edges of the edged reticle really offer an advantage. The way the reticles and all of these work is a little bit different. There are some different design styles, if you wish, from different manufacturers. The SwampFox has a reticle they call BRC bullet rise compensation. The assumption is that you are not going to be shooting very far away with this. I think it's a solid assumption. But you may have to make a very, very precise shot at close distance, where the rise, the offset between the sight and the barrel axis, which is about 2.5 inches in this case, can cause a measurable shift, right? If you're trying to shoot center mass, it makes no difference. But if you're trying to make a precise shot at 10 yards, at 15 yards, when this thing is sighted in at 50, 70, something like that, then you need to be holding over. And rather than holding over with the air, this reticle gives you 2 additional hold points, right? And that's why it's called the bullet rise, right? They are looking at not compensating so much for bullet drop, but rather into compensating for this time where the bullet is effectively rising from the barrel axis to the line of sight, right? So the trajectory of the bullet is curved. It starts out at the barrel, and it goes up with respect to the line of sight a little bit, and then starts dropping. So this is what you're compensating here. I generally like the idea, and doing drills, it works very nicely for me, right? But it does complicate the sight picture, and I keep on going back and forth to see if I like it or not. On balance, and I think there is use for it. I think I like it. I don't think it is slowing me down a ton. So there is a fairly large horseshoe, and there is what looks like an arrowhead arrangement where the tip is what you're going to be sighting in at 50, 75 yards or whatever your preferred sighting distance is. You can play a little bit with the ballistic calculator. This bullet rise thing is fairly agnostic of the cartridge. This is a 300 blackout, and I mostly shoot at subsonic. And in terms of how you sight it in, it's not huge the difference between subsonic versus supersonic cartridges. So I sight it in at 50 yards, and then I use these hold over points if I want to do something like a hostage drill. I basically make a very, very precise shot, but at a very close distance. Does it work? Yes, it does work. Does it slow me down further out? Yeah, honestly, not a ton, right? As I spend more and more time playing, there is a little bit of this adjustment, okay? But what I would say, if I were doing this reticle right now, I just turned on the illumination. Right now, the way this thing works is that the horseshoe, which is about, I think, 100 MOA inside, something like that. I'll put up the exact dimensions. The horseshoe is illuminated. This reticle arrowhead, it's not a chevron, it's like a chevron with a stick. The arrowhead is illuminated, and also these hold over points are also illuminated. And if I were doing this reticle, what I would probably do, I probably would not illuminate the holdover points. I would illuminate the horseshoe, and I would illuminate the primary aiming feature, which is this arrowhead. I would probably leave the two additional dots non-illuminated because they are there for when you really need to make a very precise and very deliberate shot. You are not going to be doing it when it's so dark you can't see the reticle. But when you are trying to go fast, especially in fading light, it is beneficial to me, I think, it is beneficial to just have the circle and the primary aiming point illuminated. I think that would arguably work slightly better. And in many ways, that's also one of the advantages you can get, should you choose to exercise it, with the edged reticle over 1 power prismatic over red dots. And red dot, no illumination, no reticle, right? So there's no physical reticle in there. With these, you can do partial illumination. So this is one of the ways you could potentially make this thing stand out. Aside from the reticle configurations, this Prismatic gave me exactly 0 problems. Once sighted in, it stayed zeroed. It looked to be robust. I messed around a little bit. I don't think they have any real issues with the radar. So it seems to be holding up nicely. Image quality is very, very good. As you adjust the eyepiece to your eye, it's very easy to tune it to be a true 1 power. I do it usually at about the same distance you see behind me. So the plates and the targets behind me at about 35 yards out. So you want to be adjusting the eyepiece on Unity power sights at about this distance, slightly further, maybe 30 to 50 yards. That's where you no longer have this perspective shift. Okay. Again, the image is very nicely corrected. It's very flat. Distortion is minimal, if any. It's actually hard to see distortion in this thing. The one thing you'll notice when you look through the image, so the battery compartment's here on the left, and what this is, there are covers that you can kind of store on this illumination module. Under normal use, I don't. So when you try to go fast, it's better to pull these off and just look at this. And the body of the sight is relatively prominent around the side picture and a little bit asymmetric because of the battery compartment here. But I can't say that it has bothered me all that much. It is a fairly quick sight to deploy. One other thing to keep in mind is that since I mentioned the perspective shift earlier, one of the advantages 1 power prismatics have over low power variables or longer scopes, there is very little perspective shift between what the scope sees and what your eye sees, right? Because the objective is comparatively closer to your eye. Okay. Again, in the basic summary is that this is a very simple optic to review. It's sighted in, it stayed 0, image is very well corrected. It's quick, there is shake awake, so the battery lasts for a long time, even if you forget to turn it off, like I usually do, unfortunately. It takes a 2032 battery, which are very ubiquitous with sporting optics. And honestly, it works like a charm. I have had exactly zero issues with it. I ran it on for a little bit on my Satme L. There it was less optimal because I had to set it up a little bit too far forward. But again, the eye relief, both lateral and longitudinally, is sufficiently forgiving, where if my eye is significantly further back, you lose a little bit of the field of view, but you keep your two eyes open anyway, so that didn't slow me down. The reticle is still nice and sharp. There is no real parallax at 50 yards where I did the bulk of my shooting, and my point of impact did not shift. The distance to my eye with that optic, and here's a picture what it looks like on that rifle, was roughly the same if I wanted to put some sort of magnifier behind it. And I've tried this with a 3-power magnifier. Kind of have to fiddle a little bit with the distance between the magnifier and the prismatic, and it worked fine. Still, the way I look at these things, I don't mind a magnifier with a 1-power prismatic, but my preferred use of a magnifier is with a red dot or holographic. With prismatics, I tend to prefer to keep them as is when possible. So that's just kind of personal preference. But the big thing is that these have incredibly flexible eye relief, but it's not an infinite eye relief. So I don't like to have a prismatic that far out. It works, but to me it's not ideal. So this sort of a setup as a solitaire optic is where I think it excels. On the other hand, if you wanted to use this with a night vision, you can mount it further forward. It will work just fine, and it will leave you space for helmet-mounted night vision device, and you can just turn off illumination, have a black edge reticle. It will work reasonably well with most night vision devices, right? Night vision devices see, especially old ones, see in a slightly longer wavelength range. The one I have is a Photon from Photonis 4G, and that one can see through this thing without any issues. But anyhow, so that's that. That's a very short overview. Usually my reviews get longer if I find something bad to criticize, and there really isn't anything here other than some personal preferences in the reticle. I have nothing truly negative to say about this thing.